Like Jesse said, my name is Maddie Smith. I'm a junior biochemistry major here. And I did a J-term in North Carolina at Carolina's Medical Center. So today I'm just going to share with you my experience there and kind of all the things that I learned and got to do. So just as a disclosure before I start, all the patients' names and information is going to be kept confidential, and anything that I do release is followed by HIPAA rules and has been consented by the patient. So any information I do share has been consented. So just to start, this is where I got to stay over J-term. Pretty bad place to stay, right? So I stayed with my aunt and uncle who live in Charlotte. My uncle is a nephrologist at the hospital that I worked at, so that's how I got into that. But this is the hospital that I worked at, Carolina's Medical Center. So to start, I'm going to give you guys some information about the kidney, just to start with the presentation, and then I'm going to move on to what happens when you have kidney failure, and then kind of go into dialysis and transplant, which is a treatment for that, and then explain a case study that I did while I was there, and then share with you all the information about like OR, ER time, and all the different things that I did. So the kidney is two small organs on the lower half of your rib cage, and they have many roles. They maintain the proper amount of water in the body and correct mineral content. They also remove waste from the blood, and they produce hormones that regulate blood pressure. They also maintain blood pressure and create urine in the body. The kidneys are connected to the bladder through a ureter, and that's how you maintain or regulate all of your waste. So what happens when you have kidney failure is that you can't eliminate the waste in your body, which leads to acid content in your body and all sorts of bad problems. So it's serious, and the way that you can get kidney failure is through disease, and disease can be inherited, or it can be something that you just develop later on in life. So there is congenital kidney disease, which is from when you're born, and in this case there's childhood PKD, which is childhood polycystic kidney disorder, and that's when, as a child, you start developing cysts on your kidneys, and those cysts grow and get bigger and bigger, which prevents your kidney from functioning the way it should. And then there's also a genetic factor of this, which is adult PDK, which is adult polycystic kidney disorder, and this develops later on in life, so you may have a normal kidney for 30 years of your life, and then later in your life it develops around age 30 to 40, and then again those cysts progress and then prevents your kidney from working. So the results of failure is a buildup of waste in your body, which also leads to high blood pressure, anemia, because your kidneys produce hormones that regulate blood in your body. So anemia is when you can't produce enough red blood cells to keep producing bone marrow. So that leads to weakened bones, and some symptoms of this is you get nauseated, and you can become really tired, and then you start, as your kidneys begin to fail, you have little to no urine output. So then there's end-stage renal disease, which is when your kidneys completely stop working, and it's stage 5 of this disease, and that's when you have no urine output. So at this point, you have to have a transplant or dialysis in order to continue to live. So on that, there is transplant, and I'm going to speak a little bit about it. So when you have a transplant, you can have a living or deceased donor. A living donor comes from obviously someone who's living, and that person can be a relative or a friend who has decided to give you their kidney. And if you do donate a kidney, you can live with one kidney. I think of it kind of like a fish tank. So if you have one kidney that's not working very well and you get donated a kidney, they just put that kidney in with the old kidneys, and it filters through. So if you have a dirty fish tank and a filter that's not working and you put in a new filter, then it helps filter out all that product. So there is a long waiting list though if you are on let me go back. You can also have a deceased donor, which comes from someone who is deceased. So this person can still have a heart beating if they are pronounced medically dead, which means that they're brain dead. So their organs will be retrieved if they choose to be an organ donor. And then you can use that kidney. So the waiting list, there's very low amount of organs to donate. So once you are approved or once you get on a list and you are a candidate for a transplant, you could be on the list for a year up to like 15 years. So the reason for the waiting list is that there's very certain criteria that you have to go through to get a transplant, because a kidney, when you're putting a foreign object in a new body, your body has an immune system that builds up antibodies to foreign things, so when you get sick, you can fight that sickness. Speaking of, because I'm losing my voice. So you have to make sure that the blood tissue and the blood types match in the donor and in the recipient, so that you can decrease the risk of infection and getting rid of that new kidney. So once you get the approval, if you have a living donor, so a family member or someone who is matched to you, you just have to set up a surgery date and make sure that it works for the donor and the recipient. But if you have a deceased donor, you have to wait for that match and then make sure that you are correctly associated with that person, and then you can go on with the surgery. There's also laparoscopic surgery, which is for living donors, and it's where the surgeons, instead of having an open surgery, they go in with kind of like a robot arm. They're small tubes, and it helps the surgeon make less of an incision, and the recovery time is quicker. So say I wanted to give my kidneys to Abby, I would want to do the laparoscopic, because then my recovery time would be better. And then recovery and compliance is important because, like I was talking about, there's a lot of rejection when you put an organ inside of a body. So when doctors evaluate if you're a good candidate for a transplant, they look at your support system and if you will be able to take medications that they give you, because it's really important to make sure that once you get the kidney, you are going to take care of it. And that also comes together with the fact that there aren't very many organs to donate. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. So outside of transplant, there's dialysis. And this is another option if you can't get a transplant. And a lot of people don't know what dialysis is, but it's really common. And basically what it is all of the blood is removed from your body, and it's processed through simple diffusion. And I have a diagram of it, I'll show you guys. But basically there's two containers in the dialysis room, and one contains filtered water that has like calcium, potassium, and all the things that your blood is lacking. And then the other one has a bicarbonate solution, and then the dialysis solution. And these two are passed through a semi-permeable membrane that's created through the machine, and it helps the acid in the blood be filtered with the dialysis solution, so it pulls the acid from the blood, and then all that blood is processed back into the body. So it's kind of a working system that helps take out that acid. And then this right here is kind of a diagram of what's called a fistula. And a fistula is an access point for hemodialysis. And in hemodialysis, these patients go in like 3 to 4 times a week, to put it in perspective for you, for like 4 to 6 hours a day. So they start out and they go in the morning, and then they get dialysis, which processes all the blood through your body. And then they go home and they're really tired, and they're constantly getting pricked. So the 3 places you can get pricked is in your jugular and your femoral, and then your third artery. So if you create a fistula, which is, it's a big word, but an anastomosis that goes into your forearm and your non-dominant arm, and it's surgically inserted so that during dialysis, whoever is your nurse can just prick the fistula instead of having to go in through those arteries. And this helps eliminate infection and all sorts of complications with being pricked. There's also peritoneal dialysis, which is in your stomach. And that's another form to if you don't have the option to get a fistula or do the other 3 access points. So this is just an example of dialysis, so you can kind of see what I was talking about. This would be the semi-permeable membrane, so that the blood and the dialysate flows through. And if you are a chemistry or biology major, you should know about simple diffusion and how things move from high to low. So they put the dialysate and the blood in an opposite flow so that it creates a gradient that pulls the acid out of the blood. So that was just that. So during my internship, I actually got to go to a dialysis clinic. And this clinic was in West Charlotte, which is kind of a rougher part of town. So you have people who are usually at or below the poverty line, and a lot of them are Black Americans. So I worked with Holly Garner, who is a nurse practitioner, and she was awesome. She's just this like super outgoing, very strong lady, and she just demands respect from all these patients. And it's kind of sad because a lot of these patients are in rough situations. A lot of them are doing drugs. They all have diabetes or high blood pressure, so they're in there all the time. But I learned a lot about being like a good doctor and not just knowing the medicine, but also like knowing how to talk to your patients and have them trust you. So this kind of pulled a lot at my heartstrings, and that's why I got really interested in nephrology because of that. So the day that I was there, it was a lab day, and on that day, she goes through with each patient, she goes to them individually and discusses what their levels are, high and low. So if they're high in potassium or high in calcium and different things. And from that, when they go home, they can adjust their diets and such so that the dialysis is as successful as possible. And I already touched on the culture and the patient interaction. So now to my favorite part, which was my case study. And so my first day in the hospital, I did rounds with the kidney transplant team, and I met this 59-year-old male, and him and his wife were in the room, and they were super, super nice, and they just kind of welcomed me in, and I started learning more and more about him. And he actually developed, he had adult polycystic kidneys, so he was healthy all his life, and then he was 35 and he started to have kids, so he wanted to get a new insurance plan. So the insurance plan made him go just get like a routine checkup, and they found that he had high blood pressure. So then they sent him in for a CT scan, and they found cysts on his kidneys. And actually what he didn't know was that he had this trait in his family, because they weren't like sciencey people, so they didn't think that since his dad had it, maybe he would have it. But actually it was an autosomal dominant trait in his family, which was shown because his sisters also had it. So I did a whole family tree, which was really cool for me to be able to apply something that I learned like my freshman year in biology to like a real situation. So anyways, he was diagnosed with end renal disease, which was the fatal condition where he needed a transplant or dialysis. So he was on dialysis, and he kind of explained to me what it was like being on dialysis. I'm gonna get some water because I'm losing my voice. It really made me feel compassionate for him because, like I was saying earlier, he was on dialysis 3 days a week for 6 hours. So he would go in, had to be away from his family, couldn't work. Basically, he said he quit his job and was there, and he would come home. He was a really active, very healthy person all his life, and he would just be so tired all the time. So he couldn't do the normal activities that he was used to doing. So basically, he was on dialysis, and he was lucky because he was only on dialysis for a year before they found a match for him. And it was really cool because my first day in Charlotte, they're not cool, but there was a shooting, and a police officer's son was killed, and he was taken to Carolina's Medical Center. And actually, he was a perfect match for this 59-year-old that I met the next day. So they matched them together, and he got to have a transplant after only a year of dialysis. So what was also very cool and why I'm tied to this study was I was invited to go to his organ procurement. So the young kid who was shot, he was an organ donor, and I got to go out with the transplant team to Gastonia Memorial Hospital, which is in a town just a few miles from Charlotte, and actually be a part of the organ procurement. So when we got there, I was there with the whole transplant team, and I walked into the OR, like never seen an OR before, and it was the coolest thing ever. And I'm standing there in my little green scrubs, and Dr. Denny, who is one of the surgeons that I got really close to, he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm just watching, like trying to stay out of the way." And he was like, "Someone teach her how to scrub in." And I was like, "What?" Because I don't know if you guys know, but like if you're not a medical student and you're not trained, there's no way that you're gonna be scrubbed in, like in the blue gown and sterile, being able to touch the body. So he had one of his residents teach me how to scrub, which usually you have to take a class, but he taught me in like 10 minutes. And I scrubbed in, and I came over, and I was still really shy, like trying not to be in the way. I had my hands with like my sterile gloves. And I stood next to like Surgeon Denny, and I was like, "Hi." And he was like, "Put your hands in the field." I was like, "Okay." So he put my hands on the body. And when you have, since he was deceased donor, they just cut them open all 4 ways, and it's an open surgery. So they just got out this big saw, and like blood went flying everywhere, and I had blood all over my face, and it was totally cool. And I didn't pass out, which they were all very impressed. They're like, "Did you eat a good lunch today?" And I was like, "I'm fine." So that was really cool, and I actually got to do not a lot in the surgery, but because that was my first time scrubbing in. But I started with holding like the liver out of place so they could get back into the kidneys, and then he let me cut some arteries, and I did some suturing in the end. But basically, it was just a really cool first experience in the OR. And then in the end, they close the body up because the funeral home takes the body, and I actually got to suture the body closed, which it was terrible because it was my first suture, but it was still cool that it was like an actual body. And it was also a really good anatomy lesson for me because I got to see everything that was going on in that body. So this is just a picture of some blood. And then this is the locker room that I kind of kept all my stuff in, and it's the surgeon's lounge. So it was like cool, I had the password and everything. And then by the end of my time, so the next day, that was my second day. And so I kind of met Dr. Denny, and he introduced me to his resident, and his resident gave me his phone number, and he was like, "I'll text you anytime we have an OR case." So after that, he would just text me, and I would just go into the surgeon's lounge, scrub in, come down, and then come into the OR. So it just kind of became something that was normal, like, oh, Maddie's gonna be in here today, which was very cool for me. So going on with my case study, that was his organ procurement. And then, so kidneys last for about 12 hours after you take them out of a body on a pump, but surgeons like to get them into the new body in about like 6 hours. So they did that surgery the very next morning, which was my 59-year-old male, so that I got to see it come out of the body and then go into him. And so I scrubbed in on his surgery as well. And then after his surgery, I was doing morning rounds, and I got to go check on him and see how he was doing and progressing. And he was a super healthy guy, like I said before, so his turnaround was really, really good, which was cool for me to see. So every day when I came home, I mean, I was taking notes all day, different vocab and different things that I was learning. So when I would get home, which was depending on the day, some days I would leave the house at 5 a.m. and not get home till midnight, or some days I'd come home early and just want to research everything. Like, it was so fun. But this is just an example of a journal that I did on that donor surgery. Not all correct grammar and stuff, but I just thought you guys might want to see a little bit of what I was writing about. And this is actually one of the ORs that I worked in case no one's ever seen an OR. And a lot of times you have like the anesthesia in the back, and you have a whole team of people there, and then you obviously have the person on the bed and surgeons around it. And I just usually stood on like the lower part of the bed next to the resident assistant. So there's that. So all the surgery and stuff was really cool with nephrology, but the goal of my internship from my uncle was to make sure that I was exposed to all parts of the hospital, because I didn't know what I wanted to do with medicine yet, so he wanted to get me into all the nitty-gritty and different stuff. So of course, since he's a nephrologist, I learned a lot about the kidney, but I also did some clinical stuff. So I went to the outpatient units, like I was saying, the dialysis, but I also went to just the normal doctor's office where you would sit down with your PA and talk about like symptoms you're having and things like that. And then I did some ped stuff, which was really cute, but I thought I wanted to be a pediatric doctor until I went and saw a bunch of screaming babies, and that was not what I wanted to do. So that was good and confirming for me that I don't want to be a pediatric doctor. And then I did some time in the ER, which was one of my favorite things outside of the nephrology, just because it's such fast-paced and so many people are coming in with different things. And one thing that was really interesting was we had a guy who came in, and he had gotten in a car accident that night, and he was driving 120 miles an hour. His alcohol content was 3 times over the legal limit, and he was killed in this accident. And so they took him from the ER, and he was a donor, so they retrieved all of his organs. So that was the second organ procurement that I got to scrub into. So we went down and retrieved all of his organs. And in that, his heart was actually really healthy, which is surprising. So they had the team of the cardiologists come in and take the heart. So I was standing there scrubbed in, and you have like goggles and everything on, so no one can really tell who you are. And the cardiologist came in, and then the surgeon for heart surgery, and he just started handing me stuff because I was standing right there, and I was like, I'm not a surgeon. But Dr. Denny was also there, and Vince Cassingale, who is another surgeon, and they kind of trusted me and were like, as long as you tell her what to cut and where to cut, she can help you. So I got to be kind of a first assist in that way to this heart surgery with this guy that came in, which was super cool. And then I did some time in the surgical trauma ICU, which is where you take your highest trauma patients. And Carolinas is a Trauma 1 medical center, so they get a lot of those in and out. So this was a really good experience and maybe something I was considering for a career option if I don't do ER or something else. And then I also saw some general surgery. So if you've ever had like a sports accident or like torn an ACL, when they do those things, I saw a few of those. So by the end of my time, I was trying to always be in the OR. So my uncle would be like, hey, do you want to go see this? Do you want to go see that? And I was like, no, I want to be in the OR. So by the end, he was just like, okay, go to the OR. So I got a lot of time in there, which helped me kind of narrow down that maybe I want to be an ORPA or a first assist and something like that. So this is my aunt and uncle, and I worked hard. I was on my feet the whole time, so by the end, we were like, let's take a weekend away. So it wasn't all work, even though all the work was fun, but they took me to the Biltmore, which is a really cool estate in Asheville, North Carolina. So I went there, and it was kind of a weekend away, and it was a good time for me to kind of go over all the notes that I had and kind of process all of this information that I'd taken in this 30-day period. And it just like, I was like overwhelmed and I cried because it was just so cool to be given the opportunity and like the experience to see these things and meet all these different doctors and PAs. I shadowed a PA, Ashley Wagner, and she just took me in and she was so sweet and just like they were all very like hopeful. Like your teachers are always like, oh, work hard, get good grades, like that's all that matters, which it does matter, but all of these people are like, you can do it if you set your mind to something like, and you want it, go for it. So it was just really cool to kind of be in that environment of people who I may potentially work with one day. So while I was here, I just had a lot of time to reflect, and I just felt really thankful for the experience that I had. And I just wanted to thank, these are all the doctors and people I worked with. I couldn't name all of them off, but I just wanted to thank all of them for their time, and also just as a reference of all the different people I was exposed to and doctors who now I have personal relationships with, and they know about my personal life and, you know, running and everything like that. So I just wanted to thank them if anybody was watching this presentation. Yeah, does anybody have any questions?
How long did your organ transplants usually take?
It depended on the transplant. So kidneys usually take about 3 to 5 hours depending on the person. So if you have like a very overweight person, you have to work through a lot of fat. It usually takes like 5 to 6 hours, but the more healthy people you can, and like a really good surgeon can get it done in like 3 to 4 hours. But like liver procurements take a lot longer because they're a lot more precise. So those were like 8 hours. And sometimes I would sit through, so they would do, so in one OR room, they would do the procurement and take the organ out, and then across the hallway, they would have the recipient. And so you would run across the hall with the new kidney and put it in right away, because it'll work better the sooner you take it out and go in. So I'd be there for like 12 hours if we did that. But it's really cool how the doctors communicate between those two rooms, because they time it almost perfectly, which is amazing. But yeah, so it just depends on what they're doing. But yeah, I was on my feet a lot. Yeah.
So you're saying that they don't bother to remove one of the kidneys when you put in the new kidneys? I mean, they have 3 kidneys.
Yeah, so in this case, the polycystic kidneys are like the diseased kidneys, and sometimes they'll take them out if they're a harm to the body, but usually they look on a CT scan and see where you have room in your body to put the donor organ. Yeah, and then like I said, the fish tank example, then it just works to filter out everything.
I just hadn't heard that.
Yeah, I hadn't heard it either. I was like, wait, do they take them out? And they're like, no, you leave them in. So, yeah. Anyone else? Okay, well, that's all I have.